Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for March 17th, 2022. Before we begin, I would like to inform members of the public who may be viewing this meeting on the district's YouTube page that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect to the meeting using the Zoom link provided on the agenda. In addition, you must register to speak by sending an email containing your name and/or phone number and the agenda item on which you wish to speak to clerk@nctd.org. Anthony Flores, clerk of the board, will now call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Board Member Wise?
Here.
Thank you, sir. Board Member Hinsey?
Here.
Board Member Contreras?
Present.
Board Member McNamara?
Here.
Board Member Desmond?
Here.
Board Member Gasserland?
Here.
Board Chair Edson?
Here.
Board Member Jenkins?
Here.
Board Vice Chair Bapatal?
Here.
Board Member Whitburn?
Here.
Thank you, Anthony. Board Member Jenkins, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, I will. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Anthony, will you now provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures?
Yes, ma'am. For those of us here in the building, in the event of an emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire alarms and fire extinguishers located on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, ma'am.
Thank you, Anthony. Are there any changes to today's agenda?
Yes, ma'am. We have two updates. Update number one, the minutes for the regular meeting of February 17th were updated to include board member Kelly Hinsey. She was inadvertently left off the roll call list, so we add her back on. And second, agenda item 16, the staff recommendation, should the board approve reauthorizing remote teleconference meetings. The effective dates were updated from March 18th, 2022 through March 31, 2022 to be effective March 18th, 2022 through April 17, 2022, should the board approve remote meetings.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is public communications. Anthony, do we have any public comments today?
Yes, ma'am. We have two on the general comment period and two on agenda item 10.
Okay, thank you. Would you please call the first public communications speaker?
Yes, ma'am. First, we will have Ms. Camilla Rang, to be followed by Mr. Mike Meyer. Ms. Rang, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Flores. Could you put up my PowerPoint presentation, please? Thank you so much. Okay. Dear board members, I would like to take you through why we in Del Mar had to decline the phase 1 fencing agreement. The fence that NCTD wants to install in phase 1 is nowhere near where the accidents are, as you can see on this slide. The accidents occur along the north end of the bluff between the very badly designed train cross on Coast Boulevard and 2 blocks south to 13th Street due to a blind curve as the train turns onto the bluff. Planned to be at the south end of Del Mar, where there are absolutely no incidents and along a pedestrian path that is some 40 feet above the railroad. It makes absolutely no sense and is only seen as petty and vindictive with no function. We want a fence where the accidents are between Coast Boulevard and 13th Street, not a walkway that has nothing to do with the railroad. Next slide, please. The agreement required that we sign that NCTD at any time could remove the whole upper bluff. We said this must surely be a mistake. They mean the fence. So we asked to have the words license area replaced with the fence, but that was a blank no. Why is NCTD so determined to keep the option to remove the whole upper bluff? Next slide, please. The agreement also calls for the right for NCTD to at any time terminate the license of public use. How can we possibly sign that? Next slide, please. The agreement said that the public could not use the upper bluff until NCTD had completed the fencing. That could take years. So from the moment we signed the agreement, no one could use the upper bluff until the fence was up. Unacceptable. Next slide, please. We offered to take on all liability for the upper bluff as long as the NCT did not install the fence, but NCT declined our offer. Why? Only Matt Tucker knows, and he won't answer us. Perhaps he will answer you. Next slide, please. We want a fence that makes sense. We want a fence where the accidents happen between Coast Boulevard and 13th Street. We ask for 2 safe crossings, 1 at 11, 1 at 8. As for the real problem, people that are lingering on the rails, you can install motion sensor cameras that will be programmed to recognize when someone is doing more than just crossing, and they will warn people to get off. The train will be relocated within 10 years. Do not destroy the whole bluff for those years. Let's work together for a solution that everyone can live with, not just NCTD. Next slide, please. In regards to the cease and desist from the Coastal Commission and more that are coming, are you aware that you will personally be involved in breaking the sacred California Coastal Act that people worked so hard for in the 70s? Is that really something you want to do? Take a step back and think about how you ended up there. When did you become one of those people? Perhaps it's time to take a breather and return to the good side. If you stick to your environmentally destructive path, I would like to end this with quoting my native countrywoman when she faced the United Nations in regards to their bleak response to global warming. How dare you? Thank you.
Please call the next speaker, Anthony.
Yes, ma'am. We have a Mr. Mike Meyer. Mr. Meyer, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. My name is Mike Mayer. I live in Del Mar. I'm speaking against the upper bluff fence in Del Mar. The fence must be installed where there are documented safety issues between 13th Street and Coast Boulevard. There are no documented safety issues between 9th Street and Del Mar Woods, therefore, no fence. NCTD has no geotechnical analysis of the upper bluff. The Layton report did not address the stability of the fragile sandstone upper bluff. NCTD wants the right to modify, relocate, or move the upper bluff. Why? NCTD must be transparent with the city of Del Mar and the public about their short and long-term plans. NCTD has proven to be a bully with no respect for the law, the city of Del Mar, or public input. NCTD does not have the right to put our fragile upper bluff and homes at risk, deny public access to the coastal trails and beaches, and ruin our natural coastal views. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Rang and Mr. Meyer. Ms. Rang asked a question of Mr. Tucker. Would Mr. Tucker have a moment to please respond?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think Casey Foster has put together a memorandum that addresses the feedback from Mrs. Rang. Just to cover a couple of things, in addition to the memo, some of it's already covered. The whole need for the fencing of the entire Bluffs upper area has been documented pretty extensively by NCTD. Just a few weeks ago, we had someone fall from the upper Bluffs that required emergency response to rescue that person. We've talked about it in terms of the risk and liabilities associated to NCTD. I know Ms. Rang raised the question related to the city of Del Mar wanting to accept liability for the use of the upper Bluff area including without having a fence. But that would just simply means that anytime someone left that area and walked into the NCTD right away, that NCTD then will continue to be on the hook for those kinds of specific issues. In terms of the question that she raised relative to certain language that was included in there, specifically NCTD by the Federal Transit Administration is required to maintain continued satisfactory, continuing control over NCTD assets. That would mean, sorry, Andy, no, my camera was not on. That would mean in all of these real estate transactions that NCTD does do, we always include that language as part of the templated requirement from the Federal Transit Administration. NCTD has no plans to remove the upper Bluffs. That was never part of the discussion whatsoever has no intent to remove the upper bluff whatsoever, but that was not a sticking point in that agreement.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry
Yes,
if I
ma'am.
may. This is not an item that's on the agenda. I do not believe it's appropriate to have a discussion on public comment without it being on the agenda.
Thank you. I was only asking for an answer to the question, and I think it was answered. And thank you, Mr. Tucker, for that answer. I do also see Board Member Gasserlin's hand up. However, this is public communication time. This is not board member communication time, and it's not a time to debate. So thank you very much.
I will reserve my comment for board member comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I have two quick protocol items to share. First, I ask board members to please hold comments and questions until after each agenda item has been presented. Second, when it comes time for board member questions and comments, please use the raised hand function and wait until you're called upon to speak. That keeps our meetings running a little smoother here on Zoom. There are 14 items on the consent agenda today. I will be pulling item 10, as it's my understanding that we have a member of the public registered to speak on this item. Anthony, have any members of the public requested an additional consent item to be pulled?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Do any board members wish to pull any consent items?
Yes, I just want to agree with item 10, Jewel. I'm hoping that we'll get at least a brief presentation on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anthony, have any, sorry. So could I ask for, seeing no hands raised other than the comment by Councilmember or Board Member Gasserlind, may I have a combined motion to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of February 17th, 2022, and today's consent items 1 through 9 and 11 through 14?
I do have a question, a clarifying question on number 13. This is to authorize.
Excuse me, are you pulling this item?
Well, I'd rather not pull if I can simply have a question answered.
It's not really a Q&A thing. If you want to pull it, we can trail it to the end of the agenda and you can ask your question at that time. Would you like to pull this item?
Yes, please, Chair.
Okay, so in that case, could we have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting for February 13th or February 17th, 2022, and today's consent items 1 through 9 and 11 through 12 plus 14?
So moved by Jenkins.
Second by Bhat Patel.
Moved by Jenkins, second by Bhat Patel. Anthony, please call for the vote.
On the motion of Board Member Sharon Jenkins, seconded by Board Vice Chair Priya Bhat Patel, to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of February 17, 2022, consent items 1 through 9, 11, 12, and 14. Board Member Bhat Patel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasselman?
Aye.
Board Member Hinsey?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Aye.
Board Member Wise?
Yes.
Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. At the chair's discretion, items pulled from consent may be heard immediately following approval of the balance of consent items. With that in mind, I ask that we take agenda item number 10 now, rather than trailing that one to the end of the agenda, since it was pulled by a member of the public, and then they can shorten their time here if they so choose. Tracy Foster, Chief Development Officer, will introduce agenda item 10.
Edson, and good afternoon, board members. As this agenda item is to receive a report, we do not have a formal presentation for you today. I will, however, provide you a brief overview of this report. By way of background, in 2002, Senate Bill 1703 was passed, creating a consolidated transportation agency in San Diego, and transferred certain planning and project authority from NCTD and MTS to SANDAG. Per Senate Bill 1703, SANDAG is the lead agency for funding and implementation through construction of certain projects, which include capacity enhancing railroad projects. As the lead agency for certain projects, SANDAG prepares quarterly updates, which provide detailed information on all current projects. The report you are receiving is the quarterly program status report number 91 for the period of October through December of 2021. This report was completed and issued to NCTD in February of this year. There's a great deal of detailed information within this report, but at a very high level, it includes corridor-wide project progress, noting various accomplishments, planned activities, schedules, budgets, funding sources, and there's also some great photos within to provide some project visuals. Additionally, I'd like to add that SANDAG staff is joining us today. Sharon Humphreys, our Director of Engineering and Construction, is here and available to support any questions you may have. That concludes my summary of this item, and the team is happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Anthony, please introduce the speaker.
Yes, ma'am. Our first speaker will be Ms. Camilla Rang, to be followed by Mr. Drew Cady. Ms. Rang, are you there?
Now, yes, I didn't get the unmute button until now. Yes, thank you, Mr. First. Could you put up my, yes, there you go. Thank you very much. Oh, could you make it look nicer? Thank you. Hi again. I want to make a few remarks regarding SANDAG's phase 5 and 6 of Delmar Bluff. SANDAG is requested to expedite those phases, and the way I read it, it's because of the landslide in 2021 when emergency repair was necessary. And SANDAG fears that the rest of the bluff is equally unsafe. It's not necessarily the case. The landslide on February 28 last year was due to very special circumstances. Next slide, please. During the repair of that landslide, 3 large drainage tubes were installed. And shockingly, it was then discovered that 5 gallons of water per minute is running through that part of the bluff. 5 gallons per minute. It does not happen anywhere along the bluff. So let's take a look what's different here. If you look at the bottom picture, above the landslide is a big piece of land with lots of grass and huge amount of trees. These are constantly and excessively being watered. If you also look further up the hill, which is east of Delmar Heights Road and belongs to San Diego, that area also consists of large grass lots and trees that very likely are also overwatered. If you look further north into Delmar area, this is no longer the case. I'm simply suggesting that you take a look into the amount of water that's rushing through the bluff south of Delmar Woods area where the big landslide happened. 5 gallons of water per minute is most certainly what caused the erosion and the landslide. Next slide, please. SANDAG is also pushing for seawalls and bluff toe protection along Delmar's beach. That's the absolute worst thing you can do to a beach and all its inhabitants. In fact, it can be likened with an ecological disaster. Many studies have shown that seawalls and bluff toe protections lead to beaches disappearing. As the beach becomes narrower, this in turn leads to a cascade effect of loss of scavenging invertebrates such as amphipods, beetles, and sand crabs. Also, fish that rely on wild beaches for reproduction, such as grunions, disappear. And who is dependent on all these creatures as their food source? The shorebirds, who then also disappear. Also, birds that roost on the beach, as the gulls and to protect the western snowy plover, will be impacted. So will the protected California gnatcatcher rebuild its nest on the slanting bluffs. Next slide, please. In fact, seawalls are so bad for the environment that they should be outlawed or put under strict restrictions, which 6 states already have done. Seawalls lead to unnecessary death and severely decreased biological diversity for all creatures that are dependent on the shore. SANDAG has already installed more than enough of seawalls along Delmar's Bluff. We can still walk there, the beach during the medium high tide, but there will just be a memory if they install more. Please, we are begging you to, instead of seawalls and bluff toe protection, install cement pillars, which is the least evil of the two. Please leave the beach alone. There are many creatures, big and small, winged and 2, 4, and 6-footed, that depend on the beach for their survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rang. Mr. Cady?
Here I
Mr.
am.
Cady, are you there?
I'm there.
3 minutes.
Yeah. Here are some questions I have with regard to SANDAG's DMB5 project. Will Sandag be willing to tour their proposed changes to the bluff with a group of local concerned citizens who want to know the specifics of each proposed project and alteration along the bluff? This would mean that local citizenry would accompany Sandag engineers, staff, and board members on a guided explanation of all changes to the bluff so that we know precisely what it is that they are intending to do. This tour would then be followed up with a citizen meeting with the Sandag board and with staff and engineers offering input and answers to any questions which the citizenry have in follow-up to this tour, in order to carefully assess and determine which of these procedures are potentially damaging to the bluff and should be researched further to assure that they are geologically sound and necessary. Unless there is complete transparency in the planning of these changes to the bluff, the community will have no verifiable way to assess what damage may be caused by these radical changes to the bluff. And in consequence, the community will not be able to have trust in this process, and that these bluff alterations will not destroy the natural landscape upon which all of this massive work will be done. Nothing short of this is acceptable, given the nature of NCTD's behind closed doors behaviors in this past year. You have demonstrated your indifference to the local community, and this is deeply troubling and tells a very different story to that which has been fed to us via Zoom meetings by Sandag and NCTD. We cannot even look into the faces of these decision makers and trust that they are doing their very best to leave the bluff intact and restorable after the tracks are finally off this coastline. Thank you.
Anthony, do we have any remaining speakers for item 10?
We do not, ma'am.
At this time, we are ending the public registration to speak on this item. We'll move to questions from the board. I see Supervisor Desmond's hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. I just have a couple of questions for Sandag on two items. One of which is the low sand, the double tracking of the low sand corridor, which is described as, I think, 60 miles of corridor between Camp Pendleton and the city of San Diego. That 94% of the double tracking is going to be done by 2035. Is that still on time? Is that still on schedule to be completed by 2035?
This is Sharon Humphreys. Good afternoon, board. I'm pleased to be here to talk with you today. Yes, we are on schedule as all construction projects and all infrastructure projects require funding. We are currently on schedule to complete those improvements on time. Of course, everything is pending additional funding, but we have every reason to believe that we will achieve that schedule.
Then, okay, then another, I guess, two more questions. I guess the same question for the Del Mar Tunnel. Looks like that's also going to be completed by 2035. And is that one still on schedule, I guess, pending dollars?
Yes, it is at this point in time. It would be an aggressive schedule to be able to do the Del Mar Tunnel. We're prepared to hit the ground running with an environmental clearance and preliminary engineering on the Del Mar Tunnel. And we are hoping to get some funding to advance that effort as soon as possible, hopefully this fiscal year, maybe next fiscal year. And we do think it's achievable, although it's an aggressive schedule to have it open by 2035.
Well, do you, I guess, I don't know if you have it yet or not, do you have the proposed alignment of the tunnel at this point in time? And if you do, if we could get that at a very near future presentation to NCTD, I would like to, I'm not familiar with what the proposed alignment is for the tunnel. Do you have that? And if so, we'd like to see it.
There was a preliminary planning study that came up with 5 alternatives for the potential alignment of the tunnel. And that has been released to the public, and we'd be happy to share that. What we're doing right now is further refinement of the alignment alternatives in preparation for moving into environmental clearance. And we are anticipating refinement of those alternatives to be completed by the end of this calendar year.
This calendar year, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the alignment's going to be, I guess. So you're saying you're refining it, I guess. So I'm not sure, that could mean a lot of things, but I guess once you get there, and I think it would be nice if NCTD had some input on that as well as during that refinement. But I'd be very interested in seeing what the alignment is going to be, or what's being proposed.
Yeah, basically it's further development. There were 5 different alignment alternatives that were developed as part of the planning study. And 2 of them that are somewhat closer to the shore are being further analyzed. There were some fatal flaws in some of the other alternatives. And so when I say refining, we're looking at options that allow us to go 110 miles per hour. The ultimate goal for this corridor is to be able to get trains up to Union Station in Los Angeles within 2 hours, so that it becomes a real viable alternative to using a car to get up to Los Angeles. So we're looking at alignments that allow us to go 110 miles per hour. And we would be delighted to come back once we have more information on the refined alternatives and share them with everybody. And with regard to whether we're working with NCTD, I mean, I see us as in service to NCTD, and we are their engineering and construction arm. And so we always work very closely with NCTD to develop and refine any alternatives.
Okay, well, I guess I understand you say you've got 2 alternatives that are, I guess, preferable with the higher speeds is what I'm understanding, but you don't really have a final one yet.
No. And to be fair, there'll be pros and cons of the refined alternatives, and we will carry those into environmental clearance as is appropriate, and then be soliciting public input on the benefits and disadvantages of each of the alternatives, and continuing to refine and develop them so that we can come up with the best solution for everybody in the region.
Well, and I understand that it is as you mentioned, an aggressive schedule. So I guess I would hope a route could be decided on soon, and we know what the heck it is. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Humphreys. Board Member Gasterland, I see your hand up.
Yes, my hand is up. I do see that our executive director's hand is up. I'm willing to wait until after him if he has something to add.
I think you should go ahead and make board members always first.
Okay, Matt, thank you. So I have questions about 3 sentences in the report, and these questions would be for Sharon Humphreys, I believe. So first, I want to draw our board members' attention to the background behind me. Where you're seeing the high tide line is exactly where a seawall will go. This is what we call the 7th Street Beach in Del Mar, and this entire beach will be completely gone at every high tide with the planned seawall alignment. Which brings me to one of the sentences that I have a question about for Sharon. The sentences, so from the DMB5, Del Mar Bluffs 5, Phase 5, Bluff Stabilization is one of the projects that SANDAG is undertaking on behalf of NCTD in order to make sure that the railroad tracks don't fall into the ocean over the next few years while we get that tunnel done. The sentence is, NCTD Del Mar Bluffs fencing project, NCTD's board approved job order contract with Expon Development to start fencing phase 1 of the Bluffs near the Coast Boulevard crossing for a total of 3,720 feet of fencing in the amount of $1.4 million. NCTD's petition to State Transportation Board has been reinitiated. This issue is delaying the Coastal Commission consistency review for DMB5. So Sharon, what is the delay for DMB5?
We are subsequently working with the Coastal Commission. There is actually no connection between the fencing project and Del Mar Bluffs 5. And the Coastal Commission was thinking that there was. And so after further clarification with the Coastal Commission, they are now in agreement with us that we can move forward with Del Mar Bluff 5, and the fencing issue is unique and separate from the bluff repair.
Can this sentence please be removed from the report?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Okay, the next one that I have a question about is the landslide at milepost 245.2. And we saw that in an image a little bit ago that occurred in February 2021, has added urgency and furthered the need to expedite the schedule for delivery of this project. And so my question, Sharon, is, I believe it was actually Bruce Smith that mentioned to me, but I may be wrong, that the flow of water when it was first opened up was 5 gallons per minute. And I myself have gone down there. Camilla Rang, resident, showed the water flow site. You know, it is 5 gallons per minute. And if you do the math, you know, 60 minutes times 24 hours times 365 days a year, and it is a constant flow. That's 2,628,000 gallons of water coming out of that bluff. And I do know I've alerted some of the Sandag.
Excuse me, Board Member Gasterlin, is there a question here?
Oh yes, there's a question. Okay. So we believe, so that's a considerable amount of water, 2.6 million gallons. What is Sandag doing to try to trace that water? Because that water is what soaked that bluff and made the dirt extraordinarily heavy. We know that. And we also know that that phenomenon is not happening on the entire bluff. So if we can localize it, then that removes the urgency and the need to expedite. So what is Sandag doing to try to figure out where this water is coming from?
I'm going to call on my colleague, hopefully Bruce Smith. I know Bruce Smith and Ali DeVoe are also participating. Bruce, is that a question that you can answer?
I'm not sure I see Bruce in the attendees. Anthony Ali DeVoe is in attendees though.
Well, maybe Sharon, you can answer that for me offline. So
yeah, absolutely. I will follow up on that for you.
Great. And I have a small related question, and that's if indeed this water flow is a problem throughout the bluff, do we have a mechanism to use this urgency and the expedition to truly accelerate the tunnel that will go from the San Dieguito Lagoon over to the Los Penasquitos Lagoon? Is there a mechanism to do that? And is that being explored? Because either the water has a source or the water doesn't have a source, in which case we need to expedite the tunnel. What are your thoughts?
Thank you for the question. Please go ahead.
You know, as you're well aware, the erosion of the bluffs is a combination of it's true, water flowing, you know, through the bluffs and over the bluffs, and then also the wave action at the base of the bluffs, chipping away at the toe of the slope. And nature has a way of being very persistent. And if we were able to, you know, determine exactly all of the potential water sources along the way, you know, we would certainly do so and trace them back. But what we have done is brought on our geotechnical engineers who have analyzed each and every component of the bluff and prioritized the areas that are most at risk of failure. And those are the areas that we are targeting with Del Mar Bluffs 5 improvements, is to try to protect those areas of the bluff that are most at risk. And we have geotechnical engineers that are very, very detailed and thorough in their analysis. And they can certainly share more information regarding why they have identified those areas as high priority. And while I completely agree that the ultimate goal is to get the trains off of the bluffs and into the tunnel, as we all know, there's certain constraints regarding environmental clearance, technical studies, things take time, engineering. I'm certainly prepared to expedite every single aspect of moving the tunnel off the bluffs. I'm excited about it. I just finished Midcoast. I'm ready for another big project. We know how to do big projects and we're ready to go. We need funding.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon. I see that Ali has joined.
Ali, is there anything that you would like to add regarding the tracing the water back at the bluffs?
Yes, certainly. In particular, in this area, we have some older subdrain systems that were existing that we uncovered part of one during construction of the emergency repair. And that subdrain system was identified. We did some testing in the water. We put some red dye in that subdrain to see where it was outletting, and it's outletting through the new outlets that are out there, which are the canyon subdrains installed in the emergency repair site, collecting all that water in the bluff and taking it out of there. So in combination, essentially that subdrain and the subdrains you put in are all capturing groundwater. So there's not one particular source. Those subdrains are located at contact layers in the bluff, and then the canyon subdrains are located throughout that slope. And essentially all of that is concentrated groundwater that is being collected.
Thank you, Ali. Terry, is that your final question? Okay, let's move on to Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments, and we do work really well with the Sandag team, with Ms. Humphreys and Ali in terms of the project development. I just want to make sure that we take a really realistic perspective towards the construction of the tunnel. That is a significant undertaking. We're going to have to get through what I believe to be a significant project development process. I suspect people who are now asking for the tunnel will be opposed to the tunnel as that project moves to project development. The project has to be constructed. I think the cost estimate that I've seen is $3.5 billion. We're at a great time in terms of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but I can tell you, I know of no practical example of the federal government or the state government giving someone $3.5 billion. Typically, one would have to be able to provide between 75 to 50% of the match in order to support the construction of a significant infrastructure project. I do, just for the board to be aware, have Peter Pizer coming to the board in April, and he's going to talk a little bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The third thing that I want to make sure that the board is aware of, before you can build a tunnel, you have to identify an additional source of funding that will support the ongoing operations and maintenance of a tunnel. Tunnels are not inexpensive activities to maintain. There's significant systems associated with fire life safety that have to be maintained. And so as this moves over time, you're going to have to check quite a few boxes before the tunnel happens. In terms of the double tracking projects, I don't necessarily disagree with Sharon, but that I just want to make sure there is a clear understanding. It will be a significant undertaking for us to garner the local match to be leveraged with the federal and state dollars that will be made available. Right now, the biggest issue in this region is that we do lack a local funding source to be able to compete for such funds. But through the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, there is quite a bit of dollars that are going to be made available. And I would urge, kind of within this discussion, not deviating from the agenda item, for local communities that want to move projects, for example, City of Carlsbad, trenching, that if you don't do this within the next 3 to 5 years, aggressively advance that project, going to miss maybe once in a lifetime window for project development and implementation. So I just wanted to make sure I shared those things with the board. The tunnel is a heavy, 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 heavy lift.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Seeing no further hands raised, may I have a motion to approve consent item 10, the report on projects managed by Sandag on behalf of NCTD?
Patel makes the motion.
Contreras,
Jenkins.
second.
Okay, motion by Bhat Patel, second by Contreras. Anthony, please call the vote.
Yes, ma'am. On the motion of Board Vice Chair Priya Bapatal, seconded by Board Member Karina Contreras to approve agenda item number 10. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasserland,
I will abstain until the sentence is deleted.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara,
Yes.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And thank you to the speakers, to Ms. Foster, Ms. Humphreys, Ms. DeVoe, and to Mr. Tucker for all of that good information and good questions from the board as well. Moving on to other business, we have 3 items on the agenda. Laura Cote, Chief Administrative Officer, will now review item 15.
I think, did we do 13?
13 it was trailed to the end.
Okay.
Good afternoon. This item is asking the board to receive the performance evaluation for Lori Winfrey, General Counsel, and to approve a recommendation to award a one-time compensation incentive. By way of background, next slide, please. Ms. Winfrey was hired on April 8th, 2013, and was engaged via an employment agreement. This agreement was negotiated and approved by this board of directors, and in accordance with the agreement and board policy number 3, which is committees and external appointments, the executive committee is tasked with conducting the annual performance evaluation for the position of general counsel. On March 1st of this month, the executive committee met and determined that Ms. Winfrey's performance is rated as it exceeds expectations. And pursuant to the agreement, she shall receive an automatic annual cost of living adjustment to her gross salary of not less than 0% and not more than 3%. The exact percentage is based on the California Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers as calculated by the Department of Industrial Relations and published annually in December. So this CPI was published in December and was at 4.73%, which means that Ms. Winfrey would receive a 3% to her adjusted annual gross salary. In addition, the executive committee has recommended that she receive $4,404.15 to recognize her performance over the review period. Next slide, please. So the board today is asked to approve a recommendation from the executive committee to award a compensation incentive in the amount of $4,404.15 to Ms. Lori Winfrey, General Counsel. And that concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. Do we have any public comments on this item, Anthony?
We do not, ma'am.
Thank you. At this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. Are there any questions from the board? I see Supervisor Desmond's hand up, just as I asked the question.
I'll move to approve.
Second by Edson. Anthony, please call for the vote.
On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Chair Joel Edson to approve agenda item number 15. Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasserland,
Aye.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara,
Yes.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Laura Cote, Chief Administrative Officer, you're back up for item 16.
I am back up. Great to see you guys again. So good afternoon, members of the board. So this item is asking you to consider, as we have every month for some time, the option of holding virtual meetings through April 17th per Assembly Bill 361, or to resume in-person meetings beginning tomorrow. There is an errata sheet for this item, as mentioned earlier, which updates the dates of the resolution to match the option for consideration today. Next slide, please. So as mentioned at prior board meetings, Governor Newsom signed AB 361 into law in September of last year, which modified the provisions of the government code that related to teleconference public meetings. This bill is in effect technically until January 1st, 2024, and allows local agencies to hold meetings virtually so long as a state of emergency exists, or those same officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. Next slide, please. So as an update overall related to COVID, on February 28th, 2022, the governor issued Executive Order N522, which extended the state of emergency through May 5th. And this was to ensure that the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board, or OSHA, has time to review the new guidance in anticipation of the next readoption of the Emergency Temporary Standard, or ETS. The ETS also noted that as of March 1st, masks will no longer be required for unvaccinated workers indoors. And this was consistent with the updated California Department of Public Health guidance. However, masks are still strongly encouraged for individuals in most indoor settings. So we had been following the California Senate concurrent resolution, which was SCR 5. This would have effectively ended the state of emergency on March 4th and not May 5th. We did follow this hearing, which was on Tuesday. It did fail, so which means that the emergency order is still in effect until at least May 5th. Other recent legislation that we are tracking is AB 1933. This would mandate that an employer require each person who is an employee or an independent contractor and who is eligible to receive the COVID-19 vaccine to show proof of vaccination to the employer. So if this passes in this session, it would become effective January 1st of 2023. One final update I wanted to mention is that the Transportation Security Administration recently extended the mask mandate through April 18th for individuals across all transportation networks throughout the United States. And you may recall that this applies to most of the NCTD locations as well. So if the board chooses to continue to meet virtually, wanted to also note that this would be a 30-day resolution, would take us to April 17th. A few months ago, we were also in this situation. The April board meeting is on April 21st. So the resolution today, if passed, would not take us through until the April board meeting. And what that means, like before, we would hold a special meeting of the board in mid-April to determine whether to hold that board meeting virtually or to resume in person. And again, should the board wish to resume in-person meetings as of tomorrow, the agency is prepared technologically to allow for members of the public to participate both in person and virtually, if desired. Of course, we would also work with board leadership to develop clear protocols regarding all aspects of the meeting, for example, with respect to mask wearing, et cetera. So as we transition back to in-person, we will be very clear with board leadership on what that would look like. So if you could please go to the next slide and I'll read the recommendation to you. So the recommendation before you today is to consider one of the two alternatives noted on this slide. Adopt Resolution 2204, proclaiming a local emergency, re-ratifying the proclamation of a state of emergency and reauthorizing remote teleconference meetings of the legislative bodies of the North County Transit District in compliance with Assembly Bill 361, effective March 18th, 2022 through April 17th, 2022, or to resume in-person meetings effective March 18th, 2022. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. Anthony, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question. Well, wait a minute. At this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. And now I have a question. My question, Laura, is if we were to choose door number 2, resume in-person meetings effective March 18th, 2022, would that allow a hybrid option for those who may not feel comfortable coming back yet due to whatever, for whatever reason?
So the short answer is yes. However, I will need to review some of what that looks like. It's not quite the same. So without a proclamation in place, we wouldn't have as much flexibility. And Anthony, if you could please go to the next slide. Actually the next one. So let me quickly review this with everyone on what it would look like for board members to attend virtually. So essentially what that means is if you were to participate virtually from your home, we would need to post the agenda at your home. And also we would need to add the address of where you are participating from in the agenda. Next slide, please. And some other things to consider, that we do need at least a quorum of the members of the legislative body shall participate from locations within the boundaries of the territory. So you need all to be in the NCTD jurisdiction. Next slide. And then this is the other one to really think through. We would need to provide an opportunity for members of the public to address the legislative body at each teleconference location. So not only do we need to put addresses in, but we also would need to allow members of the public to attend at those locations. So this is the sort of quote, traditional or standard Brown Act regulations that would be in application going forward. And this has been, this is something we can apply at any time.
If we chose, just one other question on following in that same direction, if we were to choose door number 1, could those who wished to meet in person meet in person?
Absolutely. Yep. They could be here in person.
Okay. I know that on Lausanne, we kind of had a little bit of a where the dates didn't work out real well. So I ended up with a meeting and I took it at my city hall, which was fine. I had no problem putting that address out on the record. And there was the capability for the public to show up at that location. But I'm going to hear from other board members, but my thought is that maybe it's easiest at this point until we work out some of the details to stay with the ability to meet remotely and allow those who wish to meet in person to come in until we get some protocols in place. Board Member Gasterlin?
Yeah, I would like to back you up, Chair. On Friday, we had a hybrid meeting of SANDAG board, and with an enormous amount of both pressure, incentive, and cajoling for board members to show up in person. There were only 8 jurisdictions that were represented in person: Santee, Encinitas, National City, Solana Beach, La Mesa, Del Mar, San Diego, and Lemon Grove. I was there for Del Mar, and I would note that 3 of those 8 were the alternates, where 2 of those alternates mentioned that their mayors who could not attend had a cold, so they couldn't come. They simply couldn't be there. So there is a certain amount of continuity that can happen when we're meeting remotely, and we don't have to worry about during COVID times having those COVID symptoms. So that's one point. The second point is I quickly saw within this hybrid meeting that I was blind to the participants who were not in the room, including the board members and the public. So luckily I had brought my laptop with me. So I opened my laptop, joined by Zoom, said yes to the people behind the glass screen. I really am joining this meeting both by Zoom and in person. And it was actually a really good experience because I could see all the participants, 149 people were participating remotely. All the speakers participated remotely, and I could see their names as they came up. And as board members made a comment or another, I could see them right away on my laptop, while the others who were doing their first hybrid meeting ever were kind of scrambling to catch up. So the point being, more of the public can participate more easily in the hybrid setting or in the remote setting. There were 10 people from the public in place, maybe 12 at one point, and none of them got up to make a public comment at the board meeting itself. So one more comment. Europe is on the rise with COVID cases, and this has been a predictor of New York and then California in every wave that we've had so far with COVID. So the variant is what some nickname Omicron 2. This is the original Omicron variant with extra mutations. It's more transmissible. It's unclear whether or not it is more, less, or the same degree of disease, but people are going into the hospital. Hospitalizations are rising in Europe. So even if the curve isn't going up as much, it's happening. So I would strongly advocate a vote to stay remote. And if people coming into NCTD is an option to sit there in the room, great. Officially have it remote. Let's do it. And we can each make a choice whether or not to come in and be at NCTD. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Gasterlin. Supervisor Desmond.
Well, I have an opposing point of view. You know, Board of Supervisors, we're meeting in person. People are showing up in person. They still get the opportunity to dial in if they like. You know, I enjoy actually the remote meetings because I don't have to drive and buy gas to come to the meetings. But I think this emergency is over, and we keep hanging our hat on this emergency and the next scary variant that's coming. The variants, even though they may be more contagious, they've been less and less symptomatic on people. So I'm going to be voting no. I think if you want to just have hybrid meetings, we vote for hybrid meetings, but tying it to an emergency that I don't think exists any longer is not the way to go. So I will not be supporting. But thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands raised. Board Member Gasterlund, was that a motion?
So moved.
I would second that motion.
And can you clarify the motions for option 1?
So moved, option 1. Thank you.
Motion by Gasterlin, second by Edson. Please call the vote.
On the motion of Board Member Terry Gasterlin, seconded by Board Chair Joel Edson to adopt Resolution 22-04, reauthorizing remote meetings. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasterlin?
Aye.
Board Member Hinsey?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Weiss?
No.
Board Member Desmond?
No.
Board Member Jenkins?
No.
Board Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to ask staff to start working a little more on those protocols that we would make the vote next month maybe go in the other direction. If we have something in place that makes sense for everyone, I think that we can get moving here. So thank you very much for that. Let's see, where am I on this agenda? We did. Okay.
Item 17, Chair.
Thank you. I'm looking at 2 screens at one time. So yes, Executive Director Matt Tucker will now review item 17. This
Yes,
item
thank
provides
you.
a detailed overview of NCTD's annual budget process, as well as key considerations for FY 2023 through FY 2027, and other relevant information necessary to guide budget development. Please note, the agenda item is on other business to allow the board an opportunity to provide direction to the executive director regarding, among other things, public policy goals and financial and economic considerations. Matt?
Thank you, Chair Edson. Anthony, could you advance that slide? All right, just to provide a high-level overview, I know we have some new board members. The budget document and process is pretty extensive. I'll walk you through some of the highlights of some key deliverables. The service implementation plan and ridership forecast provides the basis of operations for the fiscal year. It provides how many hours, miles, and types of services that we're going to operate, and also provides a ridership and revenue forecast associated with it. Obviously, within the budget, you get the operating revenues and expenses. As you all know, we're required to adopt a balanced budget, so that goes without saying. You also see department budgets, budgeted full-time equivalents, the 5-year budget outlook, the spend in terms of allocation from a federal, state, and local funds. Preventative maintenance funding plan is really something that's more internal. It's a source of federal funding that we use to support certain eligible costs. The capital improvement program, there's a recertification of it by the board. There may be tweaks to it. The board previously has already adopted our capital improvement program, but you have a chance to make some adjustments, and typically staff has some adjustments. In this particular year, likely we will have some adjustments because of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That has a baseline increase of about 30% coming to the district that will be incorporated into the budget. Business plan initiatives, we're going to be talking a little bit about business plan initiatives, but again, this is not the executive director's budget document, it's the board's. So this is the opportunity for you guys to provide me that feedback and input. We do produce 10-year forecasts for consideration for the board. We identify goals as well. The class and comp schedule is published, and we have the cost recovery fee schedule and the disadvantaged business enterprise goal, which I think may be pulled from the budget process. Next slide, please. So this is the timeline. Of course, we're assuming that the board will adopt a budget at the June board meeting. It's a very iterative step. Next slide, please, Anthony. So, in terms of the process at a high level for the board, obviously on your agenda today was setting that public hearing and receiving this presentation from me today. There's going to be some meetings at the Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee that's going to look at some of the key operating forecasts and assumptions. Those are embedded in the Service Implementation Plan. The Performance Administration and Finance Committee, they're going to be able to take a look at the operating budget before it comes to the board. It will come to the board in May for the board to take a look at it. And then at the June board meeting will be time for the board to adopt a budget for the fiscal year 2023 budget. So each year I do come to the board. I develop kind of an outline of what I believe to be guidance and strategic areas of focus. I do this in collaboration with our Chief Financial Officer and with input from staff. Again, this sets the framework for the overall budget. It identifies some priorities of activities that we will want to engage in that fiscal year. So next slide, please. So as always, I try to make sure that the board understands what am I thinking? What should we be thinking about as we get into the next fiscal year? So obviously, we should be thinking about challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly as we transition from the pandemic to an endemic. Ridership and customer revenue has to be on our mind, focusing in on a robust recovery of ridership and customer revenue is important. Inflation, I think this has been talked about widely from both a public and private perspective. Inflation has to be a consideration for us as we think about the budget. Personnel shortages. I know later in the board agenda, you're going to receive a presentation from Mr. Orlando that's going to discuss a temporary service reduction that we're going to have to engage in due to the shortage of employees, which also ties to wage pressures to attract and retain employees. I just attended the APTA Legislative Conference. This was one of just the major topics, the personnel shortages and wage pressures. And this was at all levels of government and also equally as painful at the private sector companies. Everybody is talking about how we can steal each other employees. Also, supply chains, the lead time for receiving goods and commodities. It's definitely a strain and something that we have to keep in mind when we're advancing procurement activities. On the other side, there's some good news in terms of increased state and federal funding. I've already talked a little bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I think the board is aware we were just awarded a grant for our zero emission bus program just recently, $4.8 million for that. That's a significant step forward, as well as we received a directed community grant of $1.7 million that will also support our hydrogen infrastructure that needs to be built. Some of the state budget surpluses have been are going to be allocated to support increased opportunities for transportation funding projects. That's something we're excited about and positioning ourselves to be ready. And we've seen a great surprise from what we thought was going to be the case when we first heard of the word COVID, that we've seen a really robust growth in terms of local sales tax revenues. One of the other considerations that that I wanted to bring up was our service delivery model. We are moving along with the insourcing of the rail operations. That's going fine. Phase one of that, just as a reminder, will occur sometime around July 1 of this year, which will be the insources of maintenance of equipment and train operating crews. So that's on the coaster, engineers and conductors, and on the Sprinter, it's train operators and train attendants. But one of the things that we do need to talk about is the future of bus operations contracting model. We do need to have some robust discussion around that. That contract is set to expire in July of 2024. And now is the time for us to have some significant discussions related to whether or not we should continue the contracting model. Next slide. Other key considerations are coming from federal and state funding areas of focus. So pretty much in all of the grants that we will be seeking, they're going to be highlighting issues associated with social justice, equity, and climate change. Our grant applications are going to have to address how we are accomplishing these things in order for us to be successful. There are other reasons why I think we should be focused around these areas, but one of the major considerations is the fact that the federal and state funding requirements are really indicating and pointing us towards making sure our grant requests are responsive. Revenue development. This is something we want to really advance. There's no short-term solution in terms of growing revenue. All of the projects typically take time, but one of the focuses, we want to be able to diversify our revenue portfolio beyond just sales tax revenues or customer revenues. Over time, we've talked to the board, and obviously you're aware of our project in Oceanside, the Toll Brothers development. We came with a presentation last month that identified all of the sets of projects that we were looking to from a transit-oriented development, and you approved the project related to naming rights. So these are going to be some key areas of focus. The other bullet is community engagement and collaboration. I put the questions out there. I think the answer is we need to do better. We need to do better to understand the needs of the customers, and I'll be talking a little bit about some specific things that we need to do later in my presentation. Next slide, please. So this is my budget guidance. So I'm going to walk through this. So I've talked to you kind of with the perspective about what is happening from things that we should be thinking about. Now I'm going to be talking about some specific activities. So in terms of the transition from the pandemic to the endemic, we're already advancing a significant number of key studies to better understand what may be new mobility patterns, as well as gain a better understanding of our customers' expectations and needs. We're really focused in on growing ridership and customer revenue. We're already advancing some investment and making some investments in some key areas. Given the lay of the field and some of the things that we need to do, government affairs, planning, marketing, and communication, we have to make sure that we're ready in these specific areas to be responsive to grant applications and to engage, to be able to plan and communicate and tell our story. It's something we need to do better. And so there are personnel investments, some of which are already ongoing, but some of which that will also be included in the FY 2023 budget. We do need to improve hiring and retention of bus operators and frontline employees. This is not a cheap proposition. We've been making moves in terms of wage increases, and we are right now in discussions with our private contractor and with labor union Teamsters to discuss potential adjustments that we will need to make to hire and retain bus operators. The long and short of it, we've made a couple of adjustments, but we're still behind the curve. You can still go to In-N-Out Burger and you can see that the starting wage there is higher higher than what we are paying our bus operators. We do want to advance our first microtransit services in San Marcos and in Carlsbad, which is a re-implementation of service that was eliminated due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the course of the next couple of months, you should see an RFP posted for the purchase of the app that supports this. I would say that microtransit service is 100% contingent upon us being able to address the personnel needs. Obviously, we're going to be looking at new technologies, and we definitely want to make sure we're enhancing our safety and security resources. This has just been a theme from the reopening, as well as happening within your cities, making sure that we address safety and security issues to make sure people feel good and safe about when they're at NCTD's facilities. Moving to the next area, manage inflation impacts and optimize expenses. Obviously, I think we do a pretty good job of managing our expenses, but I do think we're going to have to work really hard to see if there are opportunities for us to partner to reduce costs or share costs while simultaneously improving services. Those partnerships could take place in the forms of things that we do with other public agencies or private entities to share cost and benefits. We definitely want to squeeze everything that we can get out of technology investments to help drive down our costs. And we do need to closely scrutinize all agreements to make sure we understand the full long-term impacts of such agreements. Next slide, please. We're advancing an update to the strategic plan. I think some of you all as board members have already been interviewed as part of that process. It's capturing both our customers, internal and external stakeholders. I think this is a really key thing for the district to engage in. It's been so while since we refreshed it. Things have changed, and we need to make sure that we're focused in on the right things as we move forward into the future. In terms of social equity, one of the things that, a couple of things that we think are really critical and important. One, we definitely want to advance the low-income fare for coastal services. We have been in discussions with Metrolink. They're a little bit ahead of us in terms of advancing it, but the good thing is the work that they're doing, particularly with the fare system provider, is the same fare system provider as we use. And so we'll be able to benefit from the work that they do. We want to make sure we roll out something that is really simple and easy for people to receive that discount. We do want to conduct an equity analysis related to our operations and all facets of our decisions. We really want to work towards getting more information up front rather than us assuming what our customers want and need. We want to make sure we have identified stakeholders that can give us that feedback early on. And one of the examples that I will just point to is with the new fare system. We continued the process of having the need to have stores be able to issue some of the fare product, which means you may have to go to Vons or 7-Eleven in order to get the maximum discount. We think it's important that we have gotten that discussion from our customers to better understand if that really was the best approach for those customers. One of the things that we are working towards is actually creating the capability for those customers to be able to load those fare products on board the bus. It's one of the reasons we purchased a new fare box system, is so that we would hopefully be able to make that available to our customers in the future, where they wouldn't have to go to another store in order to get that fare product. We are asking for a SANDAG and for board support to permanently add the Sprinter Breeze fare to the regional ordinance. That was on the consent agenda today, but I think that was an important step for us. And we need to make sure that our grants, as I previously mentioned, address social equity considerations. Climate action plan, that is something that we are advancing. We have a scope of work that's fairly ready that will be put out that will support the development of climate action plan consistent with some of the guidelines that the Federal Transit Administration has provided. We're going to continue to advance our fleet as our zero emission transition. And we're going to expand it. So you're going to hear us talking about rail vehicles and zero emission technology associated with that. That is something that we're now putting on the table to look at both our locomotive fleet and to look at the Sprinter fleet to see if we can start some early transition activities in collaboration with our local, federal, and state partners. Next slide, please. Service quality improvement is always on the list every year. This is going to be mostly wrapped around significant discussions about what we want to do in terms of our bus, paratransit, and ADA paratransit service delivery model. Obviously, you see me identifying some items related to data analytics and capabilities, and continuing our focus on zero delay. But the long and short of it, I do think we are at a major intersection in terms of whether or not we should continue contracting bus operations. I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but prior to my arrival at the district, bus operations was directly operated by NCTD. When I arrived, the district was facing a 5-year budget deficit in excess of $85 million. We literally had no dedicated reserve whatsoever, and we had started the Sprinter service with no dedicated source of revenue. And then along came the Great Recession, which further reduced sales tax revenues that were projected to be $52 million down to $37 million. And then at that time, the state temporarily pulled back on Transportation Development Act funding. We're in a significantly different position, but in the process of outsourcing, we really work closely with our labor partners. They actually took a vote and supported us outsourcing because they recognized we were faced with impossible decisions in terms of draconian service cuts that approximated greater than 50%, which translate commensurate to the amount of employees that we would have had to lay off in order to achieve a balanced budget. Right now, we're at that impasse in terms of needing to focus really at a high level on service quality, retention of employees. Look, things are going to change. When we roll out these zero emission vehicles on the bus side, training is going to be a premium for the district. Retention of our employees is going to be a retention. And the bottom line is that the economy is already dictating that we have to move to market wages and a benefit package that will really ensure that we're able to attract the workforce that we need to be successful. The next one is revenue and real estate development. I think I've already mentioned those things. Naming rights is something that the board approved. But again, for board members who may not have been here, the example of that is we're having a new station being constructed in downtown San Diego near the convention center. So in this specific example, we would hope that that company that we've hired identifies a company that's willing to put their name on that station and give me multiple millions of dollars per year for their name being on that station or on a rail vehicle. Next slide, please. Okay, we need to continue to fund state of good repair in our capital needs. Again, I feel rather optimistic in this vein in terms of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but this doesn't come without cost. We have to make sure we are having people that can advance the timely implementation of these projects. This is one of the major discussions throughout the industry is we need to get the money and we need to spend the money and we need to show how that money is positively impacting communities. As I previously discussed, we have to make sure we have resources to support this significant, and I mean significant increase in discretionary funding. Right now, there's a combination of other duties as assigned people, including me, that works on this. We have to have dedicated resources. I will say that we have already moved forward in terms of hiring some of those dedicated resources. These processes require extensive work and outreach to make sure that we are successful. The next point is outreach and strategic partnerships. And again, I just think this is something that's going to be really key for the district. I know even whether it be internal or external, we need to do a better job of telling our story, telling what the benefits that we're providing to the region. And we do want to really focus in on collaborating with other public agencies to a higher level. And I'm going to cite a couple of things. I mentioned the city of Carlsbad earlier in terms of the trenching project. I know there's an invitation that we're sending out to city managers and public works directors. We have a presentation coming from a consultant that is showing some innovative approaches to implementing grade separation projects. So we want to make that information available. We also want to collaborate with communities that may be interested in submitting grant applications for grade crossings. This is going to be something that is significant coming from the new infrastructure bill. But here's the deal, NCTD cannot apply for those funds. Cities can apply for those funds. We are standing ready to help you if you should decide. So we really want to work closely to make sure cities are aware of these potential opportunities that are coming down the pike. I would anticipate within the next 30 to 90 days that the Federal Railroad Administration would release a notice of opportunity, a notice of funding opportunity. And after that notice is released, you typically see between 3 to 4 months before grant applications are due. So if you're thinking about a project, you have to start already. You should be right now thinking about how you're going to define that project, because you can't just ask for money. You have to have a developed project idea as well as being able to show where the local money is going to come from. But we want to partner with our fellow cities to advance this type of initiative. Next slide, please. So as always, what I try to walk the board through is, hey, at the end of the day, really there's no option to do nothing. And at the end of the day, whatever choices that we make, you know, there's both pros and cons of taking these activities. But I do believe that the things that I'm proposing support the long-term interests of the district and will help us over time support revenue increases as well as contain expenses to the degree as possible. And I think the operative word is going to be contain expenses, particularly as we work through this inflation. Next slide. So at this point, we're moving right into the realm of feedback from the board members. The board members will need to consider the proposed policy direction that I've provided here. And once I receive that, we'll be able to then move forward in terms of developing a full budget that captures the strategic priorities of the board. With that, Madam Chair, I am happy to take any questions. Next slide, Anthony.
Thank you, Matt. Do we want to ask if there are any public comments on this item first?
There are none, ma'am.
Thank you very much. At this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item, and it's time for board questions. Do you have any questions or wish to offer any feedback or direction on this item? Board Member Gasterland?
Yeah, my question is about insourcing of the railroad operations. I know this is something that's been going on for well over a year. Could you talk about that, Executive Director, and tell us where we are right now and what it's going to take to finish doing that and why it's done?
Okay. In terms of where we are at today, we have executed a couple of key contracts that will support the phase one transition. So if you remember, I identified that the phase one transition is maintenance of equipment and transportation, which is the personnel that operate the trains. So one of the key steps for us for the maintenance of equipment part of the transition was we wanted to stand up technical services and material management agreements for both the Sprinter and the Coaster. We've completed that. What those agreements ensure is that we will have essentially continuous flow of parts, material management, re-engineering of the vehicle as needed, remote analytics, predictive analytics associated with the operations and on-site personnel that will help us support the zero delay. So those contracts are in place. The Coaster contract has been up and running for some time. The Sprinter contract is in the mobilization phase right now, but we are definitely on target to hit the late June, early July date. In terms of the personnel, we have gone through a pretty extensive process because there were personnel that we needed to hire from the management. So by and large, we are complete with that process. So we've identified that staffing. And then in terms of the craft employees, the people who actually do that work, the vast majority of the employees that currently work are transitioning directly over to the district. That's the current status of phase one. Phase two is going to be the maintenance of way and the maintenance of signal as well as facilities. And so that process is going to be initiated, well, it's ongoing, and we'll be standing up procurements, negotiating labor agreements, as well as hiring the personnel, by and large personnel that already work on the property today. The basic premise for the transition, Board Member Gastelum, was over time, we really wanted to take greater accountability from a staff perspective in terms of the management of these services, particularly giving the changes of the technology. So the Tier 4 locomotives that we received came with some pretty significant requirements. Part of those locomotives were funded by the Air Pollution Control District, and we have to make sure that we maintain those vehicles to a Tier 4 standard throughout its life cycle. But we also started looking at terms of cost benefit for the district in terms of the amount of resources we needed to provide oversight to the contractor. But again, looking forward in terms of things like zero emission technologies, it's definitely one of the considerations that leads us to want to make sure that we have the ability to be fully prepared at the NCTD level from a staff point of view, whether it's the person who's working on it to the person who's managing it, that we have the ability to ensure continuity of operations, retention of employees, and to some degree managing costs. One of the things that as we were going through the process, we identified kind of that we on the rail side of the house, that by and large, we would be able to match the current expenses. What we didn't really say is that the historical cost increases each time we rebid these contracts can be 15 to 30 to 50% in terms of increases of contract costs each time we rebid it. We looked at that proposition and didn't think we were going to necessarily receive an adequate return on that investment, and that we would be in a better position to also manage the cost from a long-term perspective. And finally, I will make the note that we have made significant advances in terms of achievement of state of good repair. Some of these things haven't been completed, but for example, we have a multi-million-dollar signal modernization program that's taken place. And we didn't really want to be in a position of having to pay for that and then have someone charge us as if we had not completed major state of good repair activities, which should drive down costs significantly in terms of maintenance. So that's kind of the lay of land in terms of rail operations.
Thank you. So one follow-up question. So Bombardier used to be the operator of Sprinter and Coaster. That was outsourced. Is this going to be less expensive? And how many employees used to be involved, and how many will now be involved and will be NCTD new employees?
I don't have the number off of the top of my head in terms of the total number of employees, but that is something that we can provide to you. But as I stated earlier, the analysis that we showed was that we could essentially mimic the current costs for operations that we pay Bombardier today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Jenkins.
Make sure, okay. I have a question on page 8, Matt, where you talk about implementing the microtransit in San Marcos and Carlsbad. I know you had, there was a program in Carlsbad previously. Is this an implement or is it a pilot?
Well, we're calling it a pilot, but we are planning to implement it system-wide. But we're calling this initial kickoff a pilot because we want to work through various different phases and types of implementation.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And obviously we want to make sure we know what we're doing before we fully roll this out throughout our system.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. Are you through, Board Member Jenkins?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further hands raised and not hearing necessarily any board direction, I don't know that we need to have a motion.
Board Chair Edson, there is the action to receive the report.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, could I have a motion to receive the report, please?
So moved. This is Hinsey.
I'll second it.
Hinsey, second by Gasterlin. Please call the vote. And thank you, Matt, for that report. It was very informative.
Welcome, Chair.
On the motion of Board Member Kelly Hinsey, seconded by Board Member Terry Gasterland to approve agenda item number 17, receive the Executive Director's report on the FY23 budget guidance. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasterland?
Received. Aye.
Board Member Hinsey?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Wise?
Yes.
Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have two informational items. Chris Orlando, Chief of Planning, Marketing, and Communications, will review item 18, temporary service changes to Breeze due to lack of personnel. You may recall that staff provided an update on staffing challenges during our February meeting. Chris?
Thanks very much, Chair Edson. I'll turn it over to our our Chief of Bus Operations, Damon Blythe, to introduce the item and talk about some background, and then I will talk about the proposed service changes.
Anthony, next slide. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Good afternoon, board. As you recall, last month at a board meeting, I provided an update regarding the impacts of the national labor shortage as it relates to public transportation sector. We've been experiencing our own labor shortage here at NCTD since roughly early spring of 2021. The impacts from the labor shortages have been further amplified due to the effects of the next wave of COVID spreading across, resulting in further employee absences. And we are working with MV to address the recruitment needs and mitigate service loss. But the labor shortage is still resulting in canceled trips. And we're also putting a huge strain on the current workforce that is struggling to do not only the work that they're scheduled to do, but also the work of their comrades who aren't able to come to work. Next slide. So to mitigate the impact on canceled trips to our riders and also mitigate that extra strain on our existing workforce, we are temporarily reducing frequencies on certain Breeze routes. The routes that we're going to be reducing frequencies on, Chris will cover in a minute. But the temporary schedule should create additional staffing capacity to mitigate that increased absenteeism due to COVID infections and also the personnel shortages, and it should reduce the number of canceled trips that we have each day. So this is just an information item for the board. No action is required. Next slide, please. So you will recall this slide was presented last month. The numbers have been updated to the most recent information. As you can see, the situation on Lyft and Flex has improved slightly because we no longer have anyone out on COVID leave. However, we haven't been able to hire any new additional employees. So we remain with about 14% of our workforce is still open, and about 83% of the people that we want to be able to work are available to work. On the Breeze side, the situation has gotten a little bit worse. The COVID leave has remained largely the same. However, the number of open positions has increased slightly, meaning we're now down to less than 80% of the people that we need to work are actually available to work. Next slide. So this slide was also presented last month. This is just to give the board an idea of how many canceled trips we're talking about that are canceled because of operator staffing shortages, but also due to other factors. As you can see, we were climbing from July to September. and then we took a dip in October. If you recall, in October, we implemented a new service change. We attempted to reduce the number of pieces of work for operators to bid on and introduced a small amount of overtime to each piece in an attempt to cover some of the positions that were empty. However, that's not really a great long-term fix. We had anticipated in October that we would start to get some new hires coming in the door because we had implemented a wage increase from $16.40 to $18.40 an hour for new hires. We had implemented an operator hiring bonus of $2,000, and also the Paycheck Protection Program had ended at that point. And so we expected an influx of operators. However, like many other transit agencies and many other sectors, that influx of people hasn't arrived. And then the next wave of COVID infections hit us. And as you can see, that started to drive the number of lost trips higher than we'd had even in prior months. And next slide. And Chris is going to take it from here.
So as we thought about the impacts of these staffing shortages on our customers, we wanted to figure out how we could reduce the daily impact on our riders. And one of the things that's been really clear is that because these trip cancellations often happen the day of, when we have a significant number of call outs, folks calling in sick, that really can impact our customers negatively because they can't plan ahead for that trip being canceled. So we took a really close look at the schedule and looked for ways that we could make some frequency changes that would reduce those unanticipated or unplanned cancellations and reduce significantly the number of trips that are canceled on a daily basis. And the goal was really to create stability and predictability in the Breeze schedule so that we didn't have these unplanned cancellations on a daily basis. Also, we wanted to make sure we added capacity. So when we did have call outs due to illness or other reasons, there was flexibility within the staffing model to accommodate those call outs so that we would not have to cancel service and be able to accommodate, when an operator called in sick or other needs. The other thing that was really critical as well, we recognized that we were placing a really difficult strain on those drivers that were showing up to work because we were often calling in drivers on their day off or asking them to do overtime to cover trips so that we didn't have to cancel as many trips, and recognize that that wasn't a sustainable model as, while we were in the staffing shortage, that we needed to address the deficit in a way that gave our operators some relief on a daily basis. Next slide, please, Anthony. Next slide. So as we looked at the routes and the right way to address this, we had some criteria on how to approach this frequency change. And we wanted to prioritize those routes where we had the highest frequency. And so where routes where we had a low number of frequency, we wanted to make sure that the service was maintained and that we maintain coverage throughout the service network so that everywhere we're running now, we continue to run, but that maybe the frequency in certain routes where we had high frequencies was reduced. We also want to make sure we maintain the span of service. So what we mean by that is that we start the service and end the service in both ways each day at the same time, so that we didn't, someone who has a morning shift or a night shift still had that coverage. They just might have a little limited frequency during the day. We wanted to avoid the weekend service. We have a pretty limited weekend coverage now. And so that we felt pretty strongly that we wanted to maintain that weekend schedule so that that service stayed in place. We also wanted to focus on some of our short run routes, which are trips that operate on a partial routing on a given route. These tend to be less efficient routes and impact the schedule negatively and create some scheduling challenges. So that was an area of focus as well. The routes we looked at had peak headways of about 15 to 20 minutes. So what that means is we looked at those routes where a Breeze bus was arriving every 15 or 20 minutes and looked for ways where we could perhaps extend that frequency a little bit and provide some flexibility in the schedule. We also looked at routes where the service was partially covered either by another Breeze route or by the Sprinter service, so that if we had to reduce frequency in a particular route, There was either another Breeze bus that partially covered that route, or the customer could perhaps take the Sprinter to use to offset that frequency. Next slide, please. So here are the adjustments that we're making effective April 3rd. So on routes 302, 303, 332, 350, 351, 352, we're going to move those routes to 30-minute headways. So these are routes that either had a 15-minute headway or a 20-minute headway. We're going to make it a 30-minute headway. And then the 318 route was one of the routes that I mentioned had these short trips between Oceanside Boulevard and Melrose and the Vista Transit Center. And so those routes created a particular staffing and scheduling challenge. So we're going to remove those short trips and create some efficiencies in the schedule. What the impact of these changes will mean is it will reduce the weekday work schedule by approximately 150 to 200 hours. And the impact of that is about 15 roster positions. So that provides some relief and some flexibility in the schedule, because we'll require on a daily basis 15 fewer operators on a daily basis to operate at full capacity. So essentially our full capacity operation will go from about 200 operators down to 185 operators by reducing these frequencies. And that amount we believe will give us some frequency so that on a daily basis, we don't have to cancel as many trips. Next slide, please. These service reductions are considered temporary and emergency measures. We're hoping that these are short-term and that as the staffing shortage and the COVID pandemic both lessen, that we will be able to add the routes back. We're going to hope to restore these service frequencies as the staffing levels normalize. Just for a little more clarity on the impacts of these. So the routes that we're focused and that I noted earlier are primarily in the cities of Oceanside, Vista, and Escondido, where we had those most frequent frequency of service. And again, our hope as the staffing shortage alleviates and we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis, that we'll be able to add these routes back, and adding those back will be a part of our service recovery plan in the coming months. Next slide, please. We'll start communicating these changes to our customers next week in anticipation of the April 3rd launch. We'll do a press release announcing the new schedule. We'll do a number of things to make sure our customers are well aware of the changes, including a printed take one that'll be distributed on the modes. We'll have signage at the transit centers and the bus stops, and we'll do outgoing email. We'll do updates on our website. We'll use our social media as well to make sure the riders are well aware of the changes. And we'll also, provide our customer service agents and our operators with some frequently asked questions and responses, so they're well armed. So when a customer asks why the frequency reductions have occurred, they have a good answer and can help address any rider questions. So as I said, we'll roll the communications out next week, to give our customers an advance notice. And so that when the changes are in place on April 3rd, we hope to have some good awareness, and then we'll keep the customer service agents and operators, those communications going throughout the service change. Next slide, please. And with that, Damon and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris, for the presentation, and Damon as well. Anthony, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. I see a few hands up. So Board Member Jenkins.
I have one question. With our new fare system, are we able to notify customers through that? Were we gathering emails or phone numbers for texts or anything? I thought that was one of the benefits of the new system.
We don't currently have that capability to do that directly through the system. And many of our customers use the card and not the app, particularly in these particular routes. So that's not one of the areas we'll do notifications for this particular service change.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Gasterland?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for paying attention to this. You know, when there's a canceled bus, it really causes problems for the people who are depending on it. I know, I've been there, I've had buses canceled on me. I'm using a bus for my background here. So I have two questions. The first one is the bar graph of cancellations where you showed it by month. I believe January was around 450. Yeah, there. And I was wondering, one thing that we've noticed among the professors and the students on the UCSD campus who use the Breeze buses is that the cancellations seem to be happening more and more toward the end of the week and more toward the end of the day. And I'm wondering if you've been able to analyze the cancellations by service, you know, day of week or time of day patterns. That's my first question.
So some of the cancellations are due to the fact that we have operators that are out on a leave of absence, which means they're out for, you know, sort of a long-term illness. Those operators may have bid work that was, it depends on which, you know, how senior they are and what route they picked. And so we have some, you know, some operators, measure of operators that are out every day due to that. And then you also have the operators that are calling in sick every day. And when I say sick every day, you know, you have different operators calling in sick each day of the week. And so the number of people calling off sick on any given day varies. Sometimes it's as low as you know, 1 or 2 on the weekends. Some days we've seen as high as 15 or 16 on a weekday. So you never quite know exactly, you know, how many people are going to call off for the day and how many people are going to call off that work, you know, on a particular shift. And then you have to also deal with the fact that you've got those 14 to 16 people out on leave of absence. So the long sort of rambling answer here is there really is no pattern that we've noticed as far as people that are calling off. We watch that very closely. What you're seeing though is the randomization of, you know, we're trying to cover routes where we know where we're trying to maintain some level of coverage across the system. And so frequently the routes that get canceled the most are the 302, the 303, the 350, the 101, and the 351, 352, and the 332, because those are the routes that have the most frequency for us to give up. Because what we're trying to do is maintain coverage across the entire system. So routes like the 388, where we only run a bus every 2 hours, but that bus that I'm running every 2 hours is chock full because those people are just so dependent on that bus. We want to make sure that we run that bus. Whereas the 101, you know, I have good ridership and that bus does not run that frequently. It only runs every half an hour. So we try to run that as much as we can as well. But sometimes, you know, unfortunately, we have too many losses that are on the 302 and the 303. And so those just sort of bleed over into the 101 and some of the other routes.
Yeah, especially with the 101, you wind up, you might be waiting an hour for the next bus, depending on the time of day. And it takes 10 minutes or so to get to the bus stop and then 10 minutes to get back to your office. And, you know, you quit riding the bus is what happens. And hearing that from a lot of people. So I wanted to pass that on. And then
we try and not cut service on the 101 where we can, because like I said, that's not one of the routes that runs as frequently, but just unfortunately, sometimes you get to the point where we don't have any other choice, or we're not going to have service on the, you know, call it the 302 or 303 for like an hour.
Right.
And your point about the late in the day routes, and Damon, you can correct this if I don't have this right, but practically the way this happens is there's call outs, and then there's Damon and his team are scrambling to fill the routes by calling either, you know, operators to do overtime or come in on their day off. And so by the time you get to the end of the day, you've sort of run through your roster of folks that can do that. And so that's right. The way that plays out.
Yep.
Yeah. So my next question is kind of a question and suggestion. The Twitter handle that NCTD has can be quite useful. And, you know, so for example, when the Solana Beach coaster train incident happened, when there was a ghost gun on the train, you know, people could figure it out by Twitter. Google, you know, Twitter told us what was going on. And I wonder if, you know, a Twitter handle for canceled buses I ride the 101 on a regular basis, and I would go check the Twitter and make sure that my bus isn't canceled before I go out to the bus stop. And I'm sure that a lot of other people, especially the students, will do the same. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I think we're getting close to doing something very similar to that. We know a lot of our customers do rely on the social media and the Twitter feed to receive those service alerts. And so a couple of things we're doing in that regard. One, we're making those more automatic, and so that those posts are happening, and so that's a reliable way to get information. And two, we also have the transit app that we are participate in, where you can get those real times update as well. But I think your point about having a dedicated place for those alerts is a really good one, and it's something we've been exploring internally, and I think makes a lot of sense, both for two reasons, both so that riders know where to go exactly for those alerts, and then also so that those alerts don't take away from the other things we're announcing as an agency and the other communications we're putting out, so that there's a distinct streams for both those lines of communication.
Yeah, I could even imagine NCTD 101, NCTD 302, as the Twitter handles. And if there's nothing there, go out to the bus stop. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Gasterlin. Great suggestion. Thank you for the report. I see no further hands raised. This was an informational item, so we do not need a vote. The next item on the agenda is item number 19. And Anthony, I understand that item 19, the Caltrans update on the state rail plan, may need to be deferred.
Yes, ma'am. NCTD will be deferring this presentation to a future board meeting due to a scheduling conflict with the Caltrans representative.
Okay, for just a little comment, the presentation which was provided that we are not hearing right now was provided at LoSAN last month, and it was full of incredibly interesting information about the statewide rail programs. And I thought it would really be beneficial for our board to receive the same information. So hopefully we can get Mr. Gradinger back here in April or some other time soon. Board Member Gasterlin, I see your hands raised, but do you have a comment on item 19?
I did not have a comment on item 19, but I do have a request for, I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but it's basically board members' request for a change on the agenda.
Okay.
And the change would be that I could do a board member comment. I have an update for the board prior to closed session.
Okay.
We've done this before.
Well, right now, so the next thing on the agenda is actually item 13, which is the item that
okay. I thought it was closed session. Sorry.
Yeah, so item 13, authorizing the exercise of options for the purchase of 8 fuel cell electric transit buses pursuant to agreement number 1-19-23-17B between the state of California and New Flyer Industries was pulled from consent. And Anthony, do we have any public comments on this agenda item?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on item 13. Board Member Gasterlin, I believe you pulled the item to ask a brief question, so please go ahead.
And the question was about cost, the relative cost of the fuel cell buses versus the electric buses and the infrastructure costs. So will there be a standing opportunity to kind of go back and forth if the fuel cells are less expensive to operate and own going forward versus the electric? Is there fluidity built into that, or are we really on a rigid numbers of each schedule?
No, so we're going down both paths, both battery and fuel cell. But right now, fuel cell is significantly a better choice for the district to operate. While you could look at the capital cost difference between the unit cost of a fuel cell bus versus a hydrogen. I know the hydrogen, what is it, Damon? 1.3 million per bus, fully loaded?
Yeah, a little bit less than 1.3, but very close.
And the battery bus, Damon, is how much?
1.1.
1.1. But Board Member Gastelum and the rest of the board members, here's a couple of significant differences. Right now, the battery buses are only operating between 125 to 150 miles of continuous operations. We need a bus that can operate 300 miles of continuous operations. Otherwise, it becomes super duper expensive and inefficient for us to operate. The battery bus, the hydrogen fuel cell bus only takes about 5 to 10 minutes to refuel. And the battery bus takes about 2 to 4 hours, or 4 hours, Damon? Am I being overly
between
optimistic?
3 and 4 hours based on how empty the bus is and what charger you have, but our chargers will fuel the bus in about 3.5 hours.
And more importantly, just from what we're seeing right now, the mean distance between failures on the battery buses is pretty significant. And you know, at the top of my list is while rolling out zero emission technologies is important, that can't supersede us providing on-time service to our customers, many of which who have no other choice but to ride the fixed route bus system. So that's the deliberation. We're trying to go down to a dual path. We're purchasing battery buses right now, and we're purchasing hydrogen buses right now as well. We're hopeful, very hopeful, that the battery buses, that their performance would improve, because my ideal goal is that we would split between the two in terms of our overall operations to have some flexibility. I worry if everybody is going to battery buses, what happens when the grid goes down and how much resiliency we're going to have from a societal point of view. So loud and clear, I'm with you. I want to make sure we have flexibility, but that's why we're going down that path of both, but advancing more of the hydrogen. Finally, just in all transparency on it, we received significant grants for both battery and fuel cell hydrogen infrastructure, but significant grants for the hydrogen infrastructure facility. Part of receiving one of those grants, we committed to purchasing 27 buses over a 4 to 5 year period. And in actuality, we need to purchase 50 buses. We need to fully utilize that physical plant in order to be as cost effective as possible with hydrogen. We need to make sure that we're fully consuming all of that hydrogen that is shipped to the district. So hopefully that provides you kind of the context of what we're doing.
Yes, it does. Thank you. The trade-offs are clearly cost, miles, refueling, and the mean distance between failure. And I see the pros and cons of each. So thank you. I support anything that minimizes those cancellations.
Okay. With that, is that a motion? I see no further hands raised, so I don't believe we have any questions. Is that a motion to
Yes, I move we approve item 13.
Second by Edson. Motion by Gasserlin, second by Edson. Anthony, please call the vote.
On the motion of Board Member Terry Gasserland, second by Board Chair Joel Edson, to approve agenda item number 13, authorize the exercise of options for the purchase of 8 fuel cell electric transit buses. Board Vice Chair Bapato, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasserland?
Aye.
Board Member Hinsey?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Weiss?
Yes.
Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Closed session. We adjourned to close. Board Member Gasserlin, that you had a request.
Correct. To give my board member comment prior to closed session, please.
And will you be back after closed session to listen to the executive
I
director's
certainly will.
report?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So you're just asking to reorder the agenda for you to make a report instead of waiting until everyone else makes their reports at the end.
Exactly. So I'll make that a motion. And then that gets seconded, and I think we have to actually vote on it. But I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Okay. So Mayor, or excuse me, no longer Mayor, Councilmember and Board Member Gasterlin has a motion asking, would you like to state your motion, please?
Yes, although I'll ask, does the chair of the board have the discretion to?
I believe the chair does have the discretion to reorder the agenda. Is that correct, Lori?
Yes, the chair does have the discretion to reorder the agenda.
Okay, is this going to be brief?
It'll be really brief. It'll be under 30 seconds.
Okay, that's fine. Please go ahead then.
Okay, good. Thank you. What I wanted to do was provide an update regarding a cliff rescue that happened recently on March 2nd in Del Mar. The Del Mar Fire and lifeguards responded to an incident in which an elderly woman was attempting to climb up the bluff, and it was south of the so-called licensed area that has been under discussion. She was climbing up, she got lodged in a crevice, she was unable to free herself, and she was rescued from that position. So I wanted to make sure that it was clear she was climbing up from below, she did not fall from above, and the area in which this happened was well south of the licensed area and along the so-called Staver property. Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder to the second, participate in closed session.
So she fell up the cliff.
Lori, could you take us into closed session? I'll text Jewel.
Yes,
She's
I'm prepared to do that, yes. So I think the board chair was saying that we'll need to reconnect to the other link for closed session. And so now the board will convene to closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D1, conference with legal counsel related to existing litigation with the Surface Transportation Board matter.
And Lori, as a point of clarification, I'll stay here because there's nothing else on the closed. Oh, she's gone.
That's correct. That's correct, Board Member Gaston.
Okay, I'll just stay right here.
Okay, keep the lights on.
Anthony, are we coming out of closed session?
At 55
Okay, so we have 4 more minutes.
Yep.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Hi, Peter. I should know what city you're from. Where are you?
I'm in Oceanside.
Oh, you're Oceanside. Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. I've been working with one of your council members looking at the sand flow problems, and they're real and they're a problem.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Yeah, we had a conversation with the Corps of Engineers recently. The fix is simple. Just take the boat basin back out from Camp Pendleton. That'll take care of everything.
That is the problem. So you could also put a sand bridge underwater that could somehow catch the sand so that it flows from the north to the south, goes into the area that's drilled out or dredged, and then that becomes sand that you could use to put on the beach. But you know,
so there is a fairly large deposit on the north side of the boat basin jetty that's up there now. So,
wow.
Or the Corps years ago had tried to put in a sand bypass system, which didn't work, and we're looking at. So, anyway, I don't know. We'll see where all this goes and how it.
I'm glad that you all are doing what you're doing to get the images out there, so that those of us up and down the coast can understand the degree to which Oceanside is starved of sand.
Well, and
excuse me, everyone. I think that we're live. So
okay.
Yeah. Anthony, can you let me know when everybody's back on, or at least when we have a quorum ready to go? I did get everybody till 4:55.
The screen still says closed session. Is that where I am?
No, you're in regular session. We're waiting to have Lori take us out of closed session as soon as I know from Anthony that we've got everybody back on.
All right.
Sorry about that, ma'am. I was on mute. Yes, we do have a quorum if we want to come back to closed session.
Okay. Are we missing anyone who was here before? Since I did give people till 4:55, I don't want to start without them if I give them that time. Let's see. I see pretty much everyone.
You're missing Encinitas.
Yeah, I'm missing Kelly Shea-Hinsey.
Promoting her now.
Oh, great.
I'm here.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Winfrey, could you please bring us back from closed session?
Yes, so the board met in closed session to discuss agenda item number 20, and there is no reportable action.
Thank you. It's time for the executive director's report. Or Matt, do you have anything to report?
Ma'am, I have something I want to share as a tool for the board. Anthony is pulling up the website for the American Public Transportation Association. The American Public Transportation Association is the lead trade organization for public transit agencies in the United States. There are about 591 transit systems and government entities that are members of APTA and over 799 businesses. I wanted to show you this site because it has some excellent tools related to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Anthony, can you click on the tab for advocacy, legislation, and policy? Okay, do you see under that tab, Anthony, stay over top of that advocacy and click on the bipartisan infrastructure law guide. Okay, Anthony, if you scroll down that page, you will see IIJA funding and formula apportionment tables. Click on that, please, Anthony. Okay, and if you look at that one that's associated with public transit UZA formula apportionment, that really shows you, for example, click on that, please, Anthony. That will show you how much money is estimated to come in by region. Anthony, you can scroll down, but I'll make it easy for the board. In FY 2021, the San Diego region received about 118 million. NCTD gets about 30% of that. That would be about 35.4 million. In FY 2022, that number will go from 118 million to 162.6 million. And that means NCTD should receive an estimated 48.78 million. That's over a $13 million increase, which represents about 38% increase. So Anthony, could you back out to that infrastructure page? Now, if you were to go to this USDOT IIJA notice of funding opportunities. All right, so this is an important area for you board members to get familiar with, particularly if you look at the White House fact sheet bill. That's going to provide you with, scroll down a little bit, Anthony, with some summaries that are going to be related to the new grant programs that are going to be available, the competitive grant programs. Obviously, there's some things that are going to be related to NCTD only, but then there's going to be some things that are going to be available to your city, and then there's going to be some larger programs. Even programs like that port infrastructure bill, NCTD potentially in combination with BNSF and the Port of San Diego could potentially seek grant opportunities. So I wanted to share this with you all. I am going to continuously emphasize to you all the need to plan and to collaborate and develop real project plans. And that would mean for you, stop right now, look at these things, work with your staff, and make sure you have a project that's ready. I'm going to tell you guys a scary story. The scary story is sometimes we apply for grants and we don't have all of the money. But I can tell you every time we've ever applied for the grant, we found the additional money once we've won that federal grant. The key example was the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. We had to work collaboratively once we received that $100 million to leverage another $100 million. In our most recent FRA State of Good Repair grant, we coordinated with the state when we're submitting that as a federal grant application, that we're also coordinating that with the state grant opportunity. So the point of this is you got to have a strategy. I'm going to keep saying this. You have to have a well-defined project. You have to have significant local support. You have to have letters of support for your project. And you have to have advocates for your project. And typically, you're going to have to really make sure you're collaborating and leveraging. So for example, again, I will use the city of Oceanside. As we look at the development, the Sprinter, we're going to be tying that into some of the development that we're looking to do at Oceanside stations for commercial and real estate development. And what you end up seeing is that the more you stack these various local, state, and federal goals and package them into a grant application, you strengthen your grant application. So it's not about just public transportation. It's about all of those other things in addition to public transportation that is created as a matter of this project. So again, I know there's a lot of things that dominate our time at these board meetings, but I cannot urge you more over the course of the next 3 years to really be aggressive about seeking grants. Here's an important thing. This bill passed and it established authorized funding. There's a big difference between, I want you guys to write down the word authorized. That's good, but appropriated is better. Each year, you have to get the dollars appropriated. So it's really, really important. I hope you guys take this as a tool. Again, in April, we're having Peter Pizer who is the federal legislative representative for Sandag. He also supports some of our projects. He is going to come and make a presentation to the board in April. I've asked him to focus it in on the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. So that completes my executive director's report. I just wanted to share that information with you because I do believe it's of critical importance as we look forward to the future.
Thank you, Matt. Kelly, you've got your hand up. Excuse me, Director Hinsey, you have your hand up. Do you have a question for Matt regarding his presentation?
I do, yes. So this is really good information, Matt, and I'm very appreciative of you walking us through it, where to find it and everything. Will that presentation take place at the April board meeting? And if so, can I invite our staff from the city of Encinitas to come and get some takeaways?
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, they can participate as part of the public, but that is one of the things I would encourage every single city is to have all of your staff, or the necessary staff, listen into that meeting. Chris Orlando and his team, we've ramped up, so we've hired a government affairs officer and a strategic planning officer. We will have the resources available to work with you. Keep in mind that we developed that discretionary grant strategy. We're going to we're going to be updating that document. So let's make sure you guys invite your staff, that they get up to speed on this stuff, and that you collaborate with us in development of potential packages where we may be able to share information to support each other applications, or either sometimes contribute funding jointly to support projects.
Okay, great. And then of that 13 million that you identified in the list of, I guess, earmarks, we'll be planning to apply from that funding.
No, so that is not earmarks. That money, that additional money is formula funding. And so that's formula funding which comes to us directly. We'll go directly to state of good repair projects.
Got it. Okay.
So when we mention like the zero emission buses that we have to purchase, that will give us some additional capacity to purchase those maintenance activities that we didn't have sufficient funding. We would be advancing those things.
Okay, and so all of these grants that you have highlighted on the screen, that's a separate bucket of money.
There you go. It's competitive. It's competitive funding. That's what we're showing here. And one of the things that came from the APTA legislative conference that just completed was that the federal government understands everybody wants to know when the heck are these things going to be posted for notice of funding opportunities. So they're working at the DOT on providing greater transparency to that. There's quite a bit of money coming from the Federal Railroad Administration. They have typically not been a significant grants making organization, but I had the privilege of introducing the FRA administrator as part of the conference, and they highlighted their competitive program. They're planning to grow their staff by 5-fold to support the increased funding that they have as from this infrastructure bill. So there's lots of opportunities on the rail side as well on the public transit side for projects to be advanced.
That's exciting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board Member Gasterlin.
Yeah, Executive Director, could you please send this link out to all of us so that we can forward it to our city managers?
Absolutely, ma'am. And in fact, I'll make sure that when we send it out that we kind of identify a little bit of information beyond the link so that people will know where to go. I will tell you, one of the things I've asked APTA to do, and I will try to see if they would be open for the cities to participate, but APTA is going to host a series of webinars on the website. Because one of the things I told them, at my meeting was, this is great, but I send my staff so many emails that a lot of times they may not really go through the details of the email. So everyone in the industry thought it would be a great idea. Let's have some webinars around this thing so that people can really learn what's in there. But we'll walk you through this information so that you can share it with your staff.
Great. I know that the city of Del Mar is going to want to work with you on some of this.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, seeing no more hands raised, Executive Director, have you finished your report?
Absolutely, ma'am.
Okay, then. Are there any board member reports? Going once, going twice, seeing no hands raised. Anthony, do we have any remaining public comments?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Our next scheduled meetings are the MISPEDA committee meeting, April 7th, 2022 at 10 a.m. and the regular board meeting, April 21st, 2022 at 2 p.m. This meeting is adjourned. Have a great day.
Thank you.